The dust of redemption's main street tasted of grit and failed prayers. It coated the back of Caleb Thorne's throat as he tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. The sun was a malevolent eye in a bleached white sky, beating down on the alkali flats until they shimmered like a ghostly sea. It was a day like any other, a day of brittle silence and the dull ache of memory. Inside the store smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and the quiet desperation of the town it served. Caleb moved with the stiff economy of a man who had forgotten how to rest. He nodded curtly at the proprietor, his shopping list, a series of clipped commands: flour, salt, coffee, 10 pounds of beans. He was a study in granite and grief, his face a landscape carved by loss, his eyes the color of a stormy sky. Then the world shattered. A gunshot cracked the afternoon torpor, sharp and final. It was followed by a symphony of chaos, the splintering of wood, the panicked screams of women, the thunder of running boots on the boardwalk. Caleb's hand went instinctively to the Colt Peacemaker, holstered at his hip, his body tensing with a warrior's reflex. He moved to the store's batwing doors, peering through the gap. 4 riders, their faces obscured by grimy bandanas, were storming the Redemption Savings and Trust. One man stood guard outside a repeating rifle held with casual menace. But it was the leader, the man directing the assault with calm, authoritative gestures, who seized Caleb's attention. He was taller than the others, dressed in a fine black duster that seemed to absorb the punishing sunlight. He moved with an unnerving grace, a predator in his element. Time seemed to slow the scene unfolding with the terrible clarity of a nightmare. The leader emerged from the bank, a heavy canvas sack slung over his shoulder. He turned, barking an order to his men, and as he did, something slipped from the pocket of his duster. It was a silver locket, oval-shaped and intricately engraved with a pattern of climbing roses. It fell to the dusty street, catching the sun in a brilliant, blinding flash. The world stopped. For Caleb, the locket was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a key one that unlocked a vault of memory he had bricked over years ago. He saw another locket, identical in every detail, resting in the palm of his wife's hand. He saw Sarah's smile, heard her laughter, a sound so long absent it was like a phantom limb. He saw the day he gave it to her, the promise he'd made to fill it with a portrait of their firstborn child. Then the memory curdled. The image of Sarah dissolved, replaced by the jagged maw of the old silver mine, the scent of cordite and blood, the panicked shout of a man whose face was a mask of rage. He felt the buck of his own pistol, saw the flash, and then the awful final stillness. The locket, a symbol of his future, had become a tombstone for his past. The chaos of the present faded to a dull roar. He was back in that suffocating darkness, the weight of his actions crushing the air from his lungs. He was paralyzed, his feet rooted to the floorboards, his hand frozen halfway to his gun. The man in the black duster glanced down, saw the fallen locket, and scooped it up with an unhurried movement. He paused, his gaze sweeping the street, and for a heart-stopping second, his eyes cold, intelligent, and a startling shade of blue met Caleb's. There was no recognition, only the fleeting, dismissive assessment of an obstacle that had failed to materialize. Then he was gone, mounting his horse, disappearing with his gang in a cloud of red dust, leaving behind a violated town and a man utterly undone. The shouts of the sheriff and the gathering posse were distant, meaningless sounds. Caleb stumbled back from the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The carefully constructed walls around his heart had been breached. The ghost he had spent 5 years burying had just ridden through the center of town. He never finished his shopping. He moved through the rest of the day, in a fugue state, the image of the locket burned onto the back of his eyes. He found himself standing before the land office, a place he hadn't entered in years. A notice was tacked to the board: indentured labor. Contracts available. Passage from the east. He read the words without comprehension, his mind still reeling. It was in this haze of shock and resurrected grief that he saw her name on a list. Mai, female, age 24, skilled in domestic arts. He didn't know why he did it. It was not a decision born of logic or need. It was a desperate, unconscious act of a drowning man grasping for a piece of driftwood. He was seeking something not a housekeeper, but an anchor, a penance, a distraction from the howling void the robbery had reopened within him. He pushed open the door, the bell jangling like an alarm, and with a voice that sounded like a stranger's, he bought the contract. He paid in gold, the metal feeling cold and heavy in his hand, a transaction that severed a woman he'd never met from one bleak reality and tethered her to his own. The journey back to the ranch was a blur. The land stretched out on all sides, a threadbare brown carpet under a vast, empty sky. But for the first time in years, Caleb didn't see the desolation. He saw only the glint of a silver locket in the dust and the chilling blue eyes of the man who had dropped it. He had just invited a stranger into the heart of his solitude, but he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that another, far more dangerous stranger was coming. The house was a monument to something lost. Carved from rough-hewn timber and sorrow, it stood silhouetted against the unforgiving horizon. When the wagon carrying Mai arrived 2 days later, Caleb was waiting on the porch. He watched her descend, a small, solitary figure, clutching a bundle wrapped in thin, worn fabric. The wind was a predator, clawing at her simple clothes, whispering of the profound isolation she had just entered. There was no welcome in his eyes, only appraisal. He had spent the last 2 days wrestling with the impulsiveness of his decision, the raw wound of his memory chafing at him. He looked not at her face, but at the contract in the driver's hand, a piece of paper that declared her purpose: cook, laundry, rest, housekeeper, a ghost to fill the empty spaces. He passed a leather pouch heavy with coin to the driver, the clink of metal, a final cold transaction. He did not offer his hand. He did not speak her name. He simply gestured toward the door with a tilt of his chin. "The work is inside," he said, his voice the grating sound of rust on iron. The door opened into a silence that was deeper than mere quiet. It was an absence, a hollowed-out thing that clung to the furniture and lay thick as dust on the floorboards. Mai stepped inside, and Caleb watched as her dark, observant eyes took in the geography of his pain. And the undisturbed layer of dust on the mantelpiece, the single tin cup and plate left to dry by the sink, the way every curtain was drawn tight against the sun. He showed her to a small room at the back, little more than a closet with a cot. It was clean, but cold, the air thin and forgotten. He left her there without another word, and the sound of his heavy boots receding down the hall, a sentence of profound and utter solitude. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, letting the oppressive quiet of the house settle over her. She had been bought, sold, and delivered like a sack of flour. But as she placed her small bundle on the cot, there was a firmness in the set of her jaw. She had survived famine and the loss of her world. She would survive this. In the main room, Caleb sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He was a fool. What had he been thinking? He had no use for a servant. His life was a closed loop of work, grief, and the care of his silent daughter, Lily. Lily. She was the reason for it, all the epicenter of his pain and his purpose. Since Sarah's death, the child had retreated into a world of her own, a fortress of silence he could not breach. She hadn't spoken a word in 5 years. He heard a quiet shuffling from the back room, then the soft sound of water being poured into the wash basin. A new presence, a new variable in his carefully controlled equation of misery. He didn't know it yet, but the house and the man within it had just begun to breathe again. A week later, a cloud of dust on the horizon heralded the arrival of a handsome carriage, a starkly out-of-place vehicle in this rugged landscape. It pulled up before the house, and from it stepped the man from Caleb's waking nightmare. He was dressed not in a bandit's duster, but in the tailored suit of a wealthy investor. He moved with the same predatory grace, a polished confidence that set Caleb's teeth on edge. "Mr. Caleb Thorne," the man asked, his voice smooth and educated. He extended a gloved hand. "Silas Blackwood. I'm an investor from the East acquiring parcels of land for a new agricultural enterprise." Caleb stared at the outstretched hand, the blood pounding in his ears. He did not take it. Blackwood's smile didn't falter, though his cold blue eyes narrowed slightly. He withdrew his hand with practiced ease. "I'll be direct," Mr. Thorne. Blackwood said, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with an air of casual ownership. "Your parcel is of particular interest to my associates, especially the water rights to the Clear Creek Spring. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer, enough to set you and your family up comfortably anywhere you choose." Clear Creek. The name was a jolt. The spring was on the far edge of his property, the very land that had been the subject of the dispute all those years ago. It was the land where he had killed a man. Coincidence was a luxury Caleb no longer believed in. "The ranch is not for sale." Caleb set his voice flat and hard. Blackwood's polite mask remained in place, but a chill emanated from him that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Everything is for sale, Mr. Thorne. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. Perhaps you should reconsider. This is a hard life. A man alone, a small child. It can be overwhelming." He glanced toward the house, and for a moment his eyes lingered on the doorway, where Mai had appeared watching them silently. Things can be lost so easily out here. The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in the silk of a business proposition. "Get off my land," Caleb said, the words low and dangerous. Silas Blackwood's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of cold appraisal. "As you wish," he said, turning to climb back into his carriage. "But do think on my offer. The landscape is changing, Mr. Thorne. It would be a shame to be swept away by the tide." The carriage departed, leaving Caleb standing alone in the dust, the veiled threat hanging in the air like poison. The fight was no longer a phantom of his memory. It had come to his door wearing a handsome suit and a chilling smile. The battle for his land and for his soul had just begun. The tide Blackwood had spoken of began to roll in slow and inexorable. It started subtly. A section of fence cut in the dead of night, allowing a dozen head of cattle to wander off into the canyons. Caleb spent 2 days rounding them up, his muscles screaming, his mind churning with a cold fury. Then the main irrigation ditch from Clear Creek was dammed with rocks and fallen logs, the life-giving water slowing to a muddy trickle. The corn stalks in his small field began to curl and yellow under the relentless sun. Caleb worked from before dawn until long after dusk, a man possessed. He cleared the ditch, repaired the fence, and patrolled his property line with a rifle cradled in his arms. He was fighting a ghost army, one that struck and vanished, leaving behind only frustration and exhaustion. Sleep offered little respite, filled with visions of a silver locket and cold blue eyes. Through it all, Mai worked with a quiet, unyielding competence that became an unspoken anchor in his chaotic world. She seemed to understand, without a word being said, that this was a siege. She conserved water with meticulous care, reusing every drop. When the flow from the creek slowed, she found a seep near the cottonwoods that provided just enough for the house and her small emerging garden. She mended his torn shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She cooked meals that were simple but nourishing, leaving a plate for him on the stove when he stumbled in late, covered in dirt and sweat. Her presence was a silent counterpoint to the escalating aggression from outside. While Blackwood's men sought to dismantle his life, Mai was patiently, methodically putting the pieces of his home back together. He had bought her contract as a desperate, unthinking act, but she was becoming something more. She was an ally. He began to notice the small changes within the house. The scent of yeast and baking bread pushed back against the stale smell of sorrow. She would sometimes hum as she worked a low melodic tune from a land he could not imagine. It was a sound so alien and yet so fundamentally comforting that it snagged in his memory. One afternoon, while beating a rug outside, she saw the child. Lily stood half-hidden behind a rain barrel, a ghost in her own home, watching Mai with a solemn, unblinking curiosity. Her hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, her eyes the same stormy gray as her father's. Mai offered a small, hesitant smile. The child did not smile back, but she did not run. This became their ritual. Lily would watch from a distance as Mai worked. She was as silent as her father, a small, pale echo in the vast, quiet house. One evening, Mai sat by her cot, folding a scrap of paper from a discarded ledger. Her fingers, nimble and sure-creased, and folded the stiff paper until it became a delicate bird, its wings poised for flight. The next morning, she left it on the porch rail where she knew the child would see it. She watched from the kitchen window as Lily approached her small hand, reaching out to touch the fragile creation. The girl picked it up, her fingers tracing its delicate form before she scurried away, clutching the paper bird to her chest. The following day, a single wild prairie rose its petals, a defiant splash of pink against the muted landscape lay on the worn blanket of Mai's cot. It was a message, an offering, a treaty signed in a language that needed no words. Caleb saw the flower in Mai's room when he passed by the open door. He stopped his gaze lingering on the impossible bloom. He knew where it grew in a sheltered spot by the creek, where Sarah had once planted a small garden. He had not been there in years. The fact that his daughter had gone, that she had picked a flower for this stranger, was a tremor in the foundation of his grief. It was the first bridge built across the chasm of their silence, and it had not been built by him. The pressure from Blackwood intensified. One morning, Caleb found one of his wells fouled, the water brackish and stinking of chemicals. The act was so brazen, so malevolent, it solidified his resolve. This was not a negotiation. It was a war. He rode into redemption, his jaw set like a trap. The sheriff's office was a cramped, dusty room that smelled of stale cigar smoke and bureaucracy. Sheriff Brody was a man worn down by the vastness of his jurisdiction and the smallness of his authority. He listened to Caleb's report with a weary sigh, making notes in a ledger. "I hear you, Caleb," he said, putting down his pen. "Damming the creek, cutting fences, now poisoning a well. But what proof do you have that it's Blackwood? He came to my ranch. He threatened me. Now this." "It's circumstantial," Brody said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Blackwood's a big man. He's got papers saying he represents powerful interests back east. He's buying up land all over the county, all legal and proper. I can't arrest a man for making you an offer, and I can't prove his hands touched your fence line." Caleb's frustration boiled over. "So I'm supposed to just stand by while he ruins me. I'll ride out, take a look. But unless one of his men is clumsy enough to get caught in the act, my hands are tied. Be careful, Caleb. Men like Blackwood don't play by the rules." Caleb left the office feeling more isolated than ever. The law was a distant concept, an abstraction that offered no protection. He was on his own. As he walked toward his horse, a gnarled voice called out to him. "Thorne heard you got troubles." It was Jedediah, an old prospector, who spent more time in the saloon than he ever had in the mountains. His face was a roadmap of hard living, but his eyes were surprisingly sharp. "What do you want?" Jedediah Caleb asked, his patience worn thin. "Just making an observation," the old man rasped, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "This Blackwood fella, he's been asking a lot of questions. Not just about land, about history. Been poking around the county records office, specifically old mining claims. From 5-6 years back." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. What kind of claims? The kind that made some men rich and got other men dead. Jedediah said, his gaze pointed. Heard him asking about the old Silver Creek mine, about the Thorne-Holloway dispute. Nasty business that was. Some say that mine's got a memory. Caleb stared at the old man, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. Holloway. That was the name of the man he'd killed. He'd never known his first name, had never wanted to. He had buried the name along with the body. He rode home in a daze, Jedediah's words echoing in his mind. The Thorne-Holloway dispute. Blackwood wasn't just a land grabber. There was a connection, a history. Back at the ranch, a different kind of history was being uncovered. Mai had noticed Lily's fascination with a locked door at the end of the hall. The child would often stand before it, her small hand resting on the cool iron knob, her expression unreadable. One afternoon, as Mai was sweeping, Lily silently approached and held out her hand. In her palm was a small, ornate iron key, tarnished with age. She had found it in a loose floorboard beneath her bed. Together they approached the door. Mai hesitated, sensing she was crossing a sacred boundary. But Lily's expectant gaze gave her courage. She inserted the key, and with a rusty groan, the lock turned. The room was a time capsule. It was a nursery that had never heard a baby's cry. Faded blue flowers were painted on the walls, a testament to a mother's hopeful love. A cradle sat in the corner, covered in a dusty sheet. But it was a small writing desk that drew Mai's attention. On it sat a leather-bound ledger and a stack of bundled letters tied with a ribbon. Driven by a protective curiosity, Mai opened the top letter. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. Sarah's. The words were a quiet confession. "I cannot bear the guilt." One passage read, "This ranch, this life, it was all built on a foundation of blood. I must make amends. The payments are a small price for his soul and for my own peace." Mai looked at the ledger. It was filled with entries, dates, and figures payments sent to an address in St. Louis, all marked with the initials S.H. A terrible debt. This was the source of the house's sorrow, a secret that had festered in the silence. She closed the ledger, her heart aching for the woman she never knew, and for the man who was still living in the wreckage of that single violent moment. She knew with a chilling certainty that whatever debt Sarah had tried to repay was about to be collected in full. Caleb spent the next day in the county records office, a stuffy, sun-baked room filled with the ghosts of old deeds and forgotten claims. He found it buried in a dusty folio, claim number 45 for the Silver Creek lode. The claimants were listed as Caleb Thorne and Daniel Holloway. Daniel. The man had a name. Seeing it in black and white felt like a fresh wound. He kept digging, cross-referencing names and dates. And then he found it, a birth record from 2 counties over. Daniel Holloway, born 1850. Silas Holloway, born 1852. Parents, Jacob and Mary Holloway. S.H. Silas Holloway. Silas Blackwood was an alias. Caleb leaned back in his chair, the room seeming to tilt around him. This wasn't about land or water. It had never been. This was a vendetta. Silas was Daniel's brother. and he had spent 5 years meticulously planning his revenge. Every cut fence, every poisoned well, every veiled threat was a deliberate turn of the screw designed not just to ruin him, but to torture him. The locket, it must have been Daniel's, a family heirloom that Silas now carried. He had dropped it on purpose, a calculated act of psychological warfare, a signal that he knew everything. He rode back to the ranch with the terrible weight of this knowledge pressing down on him. The world had been remade. He was no longer a man defending his property from a greedy investor. He was a man staring down the barrel of a past he could no longer outrun. As he approached the homestead, the setting sun cast long, ominous shadows. He saw Lily sitting on the porch steps, humming quietly to herself as she polished the small wooden bird he had carved for her. Mai was nearby, turning the soil in her small garden patch. For a fleeting moment, the scene was one of impossible peace, a fragile tableau of the life that might have been the life he was about to lose. This was what Silas wanted to destroy. Not just the land, but the possibility of healing, the hope of a future. He dismounted, his face a grim mask. Mai looked up, and the simple question in her eyes, "What is it?" was one he couldn't bring himself to answer. How could he tell her that he had brought this curse upon them, that the house was built not on rock, but on the bones of another man? That night, as an uneasy quiet settled over the ranch, he sat in the dark, his rifle across his lap, waiting. He knew now that the subtle aggressions were over. Silas had played his hand, revealed his identity through Caleb's investigation. The next move would be direct and brutal. He didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, a flicker of orange against the dark bulk of the barn caught his eye. It grew with astonishing speed, blossoming from a spark into a ravenous flower of flame. The barn was on fire. "Mai," he roared, his voice raw with adrenaline. "Get Lily! Get out of the house now!" He sprinted toward the blaze, his mind racing. The horses, the winter feed, the tools, everything was in there. But even as he ran, a cold dread washed over him. This was too easy, too obvious. He skidded to a halt, the heat of the fire washing over his face, and looked back at the house. The front door was wide open. The lamp in the main room cast a lonely, flickering light into an empty space. It was a diversion. Lily. His voice was a strangled cry. He turned and ran back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst into the house. Mai was standing in the middle of the room, her face pale with shock. A chair was overturned. Lily's wooden bird lay abandoned on the floor. He came in the back, Mai whispered, her voice trembling. "While we were looking at the fire, there were 2 of them. They took her." On the table, held down by a knife plunged deep into the wood, was a piece of paper. Caleb ripped it free. The message was short, and the handwriting a cruel, elegant script. "Thorn. A debt is owed. Come to the Silver Creek mine. Come alone, or the girl pays for her father's sins." The world narrowed to that single, horrifying message. Enraged that Caleb now knew the truth, Silas had abandoned all pretense. He had taken the one thing Caleb had left to live for. The barn burned, its collapsing timbers a funeral pyre for his past life. The final confrontation was at hand, not on the open range, but in the dark, suffocating confines of the place where it all began. The mine, the place that had a memory. The wind was rising, a low moan that promised a storm. Caleb saddled his fastest horse, his movements precise and deadly. He checked his Colt, loading every chamber. He was no longer just a rancher. He was the man he had been 5 years ago, a man pushed to the edge. As he was about to mount, Mai grabbed his arm. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes were clear and fierce. "Do not go alone," she said, her grip surprisingly strong. "He expects you to come down the main road. He will be watching for you. But there is another way, an old game trail that follows the ridge. I found it when I was gathering herbs. It will bring you above the mine, not below it." He looked at her, seeing past his own rage to the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She was right. A frontal assault was suicide. "It is not a straight path," she continued, her voice urgent. "It is rocky and hard to see. I will guide you." "No," he said, his voice rough. "It's too dangerous." "Your daughter's life is in danger," she retorted, her quiet demeanor replaced by a steely resolve he had never seen. "My life here is with you and her. I will not stand by. We will go together." There was no time to argue. He saw the truth in her words, the strength in her gaze. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. They would face this together. As they rode out away from the dying embers of the barn and toward the gathering dark, the first grains of sand began to whip through the air. The sandstorm, like Silas's vengeance, was closing in. The sandstorm descended with the fury of a vengeful god, a howling, swirling wall of red dust that erased the world. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the air thick and suffocating. The wind screamed, muffling all other sounds save the frantic beating of their own hearts. Guided by Mai's unerring sense of the land, they navigated the treacherous game trail, the horses struggling for footing on the loose rock. The storm that should have been their enemy became their cloak, hiding their approach. They dismounted at the ridge overlooking the mine entrance. Below, Caleb could just make out the dark skeletal structure of the head frame and the faint flickering light of a lantern inside the main tunnel. The entrance was a black maw, a scar on the face of the mountain. "He will be inside waiting." Caleb said, his voice a low growl, barely audible over the wind. "You stay here. If I'm not back by dawn, ride to Brody." "No," Mai said, her hand resting on his arm. She held out the leather-bound ledger she had grabbed from the house. "You need to know what is in here. All of it. There's no time. You are going down there to fight a man," she insisted, her eyes boring into his. "You must know exactly who you are fighting, and who you are fighting for." He took the ledger, his fingers tracing the worn leather. He didn't understand, but he trusted her. He turned and began the descent, moving from rock to rock, like a wraith in the storm, the ledger tucked inside his coat. The air grew still and cold as he entered the mine. The howl of the sandstorm faded, replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the drip of water and the creak of old timbers. The lantern light guided him deeper down the main shaft he knew so well. He rounded a bend and stopped. Silas Blackwood, Silas Halloway, stood in a small cavern, the lantern light casting his shadow long and monstrous against the rock wall. He held Lily in front of him, one arm wrapped around her small chest. She was terrified, but true to her nature, utterly silent. A pistol was pressed to her temple. "Welcome home, Thorn Silas," said his voice echoing in the confined space. He was calm, his blue eyes glittering with a triumphant madness. "I knew you'd come. A man always returns to the scene of his crime. Let her go, Halloway." Caleb said, his own pistol held steady, aimed at Silas's heart. "This is between you and me." "Oh, it's always been between you and me." Silas chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "You just didn't know it. Did you ever even learn his name?" "My brother. It was Daniel. He was a good man. A bit hot-headed, perhaps. But he trusted you. He thought you were partners. He pulled a gun on me." Caleb bit out the memory, sharp and bitter. The claim was 50-50. He wanted it all. He wanted his fair share. Silas roared, his composure cracking for the first time. You found the main vein on the part of the claim you'd sectioned for yourself. You were going to cut him out, and he called you on it. So you killed him. You shot my brother in this very mine and buried him like a dog so you could build your life on his grave. Every word was a poisoned dart, finding its mark in the guilt Caleb had carried for years. He had told himself it was self-defense, but the truth was uglier, muddier. He had been faster, angrier. He had shot to kill. Taking your land, your water. That was just an appetizer, Silas sneered, pulling a familiar object from his pocket. The silver locket. He dangled it before Lily's eyes. This was his. He was going to give it to his sweetheart. You took his life, his future. So I took your daughter. An eye for an eye, a future for a future. Seems fair, doesn't it? Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. His vision narrowed to the space between Silas's eyes. But before he could fire, Silas delivered his final devastating blow. You see, the real poetry of it all is your wife. Your sainted Sarah, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She knew. Oh yes, she knew everything. Liar, Caleb breathed. I have the letters. After she found out what you'd done, her guilt ate her alive. She found me. She spent the last 2 years of her life sending me money. Blood money, she called it. Trying to buy your redemption behind your back. She was trying to pay for your sin, Thorn. And the stress of that secret. Well, a difficult childbirth is so much more difficult when the mother's spirit is already broken, isn't it? The words struck Caleb with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling. Sarah, the ledger Mai had given him. The payments are a small price for his soul. It wasn't a lie. This was the secondary twist of the knife, the one that cut deeper than any bullet. His idealized memory of his wife, the pure, untainted victim of fate, shattered. She had been a victim of his actions, tormented by a secret he had forced upon her. His grief was entangled with a guilt so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. He was a murderer. He was a liar. He had destroyed not one family, but 2. In that moment of agonizing clarity, he understood. Silas didn't just want him dead. He wanted him to suffer the same way he had suffered with the complete and utter destruction of everything he held sacred. The choice was laid bare before him. He could pull the trigger, kill Silas, and embrace the cycle of violence and revenge. It would be easy. It would be satisfying. Or he could choose another path. For Lily, to end the cycle for her. He looked at his daughter. Her wide, terrified eyes were fixed on him. She needed a father, not another killer. Slowly, deliberately, Caleb lowered his pistol, placing it on the damp ground. Silas stared confused. What is this giving up? You've won, Holloway, Caleb said, his voice hollow. You've taken everything. The ranch, my past. It's all yours. Just let her go. Silas laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. He was so focused on Caleb, so caught up in his victory, that he didn't see the small, almost imperceptible shake of Lily's head. He didn't see her tiny hand, which had been inching toward the locket he was still dangling, suddenly clench and pull. The chain snapped. Lily shoved the locket into her mouth and bit down, hard. The shock of the move, the sheer unexpectedness of it, caused Silas to loosen his grip for a fraction of a second. It was all Caleb needed. He launched himself forward, not at Silas, but low at his legs. He tackled him, driving him away from Lily and into the rock wall. The pistol in Silas's hand discharged the shot, going wild, ricocheting off the cavern's ceiling. The fight was brutal and primal, a battle of wills in the suffocating dark. But Caleb wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. He was fighting for his daughter. As they wrestled on the ground, his hand closed around a loose rock. He raised it poised to bring it down on Silas's skull to end it once and for all. He saw the flash of Daniel Holloway's face, the rage, the fear. He saw Silas's face twisted with the same hatred that had consumed him. And then he saw Lily huddled against the wall watching him. He couldn't. He wouldn't. With a final desperate surge of strength, he slammed the rock not against Silas's head, but against his wrist. A sickening crack echoed through the mine, and Silas's pistol clattered to the floor. Caleb struck again, a precise blow to the temple that rendered Silas unconscious. Silence descended. Heavy, ringing silence. Caleb lay panting, his body bruised, his soul scoured clean. He had faced his demon and chosen not to become him. He crawled to his daughter. He gently pried the locket from her mouth. "Are you okay?" He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in 5 years, Lily spoke. Her voice was a small, rusty thing, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "Papa," she said. Just as he wrapped her in his arms, the entrance to the mine was filled with silhouettes. Sheriff Brody and a posse led by Mai stood with their lanterns held high, casting a circle of light into the darkness. The storm was over. The ranch was a place of quiet convalescence. The air, washed clean by the storm, smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, the silver locket and Sarah's leather-bound ledger resting before him. Mai sat across from him, a silent, steady presence. Lily slept peacefully in her room, the first peaceful sleep she'd had in years. Holding nothing back, Caleb told Mai everything. He spoke of his ambition, the argument with Daniel Holloway, the single gunshot that had echoed through the last 5 years of his life. He spoke of the guilt, the silence, and the lies he had told himself. Then he pushed the ledger across the table. "She knew," he said, his voice rough. "She tried to fix what I broke." Mai opened the ledger and began to read Sarah's letters, her expression softening with a profound empathy. She read of a wife's agony, her desperate attempt to atone for her husband's sin, and the crushing weight of a secret that ultimately consumed her. When she finished, she looked at Caleb. Her eyes filled not with judgment, but with a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Her heart was heavy," Mai said softly. "She carried your burden and her own." The next day they worked together. They went to the locked room at the end of the hall, the nursery that had been a tomb. They didn't clear it out. They opened it up. They washed the walls, careful not to erase the faint blue flowers. They polished the cradle. When Lily woke, they brought her inside, sharing the memories of the mother she never knew. Caleb told her how Sarah had painted the flowers, how she had hummed while she worked. He gave Mai the letters to read aloud. They transformed the room from a place of sorrow into a place of remembrance, a part of their home, not a sealed-off wound. Word of what happened at the mine traveled through Redemption. The story of Blackwood's vendetta, of Lily's kidnapping, and of Caleb's choice to capture Silas rather than kill him changed the way people saw the grim rancher. Wagons began to appear on the road to his homestead. Neighbors' men who had previously only offered curt nods arrived with lumber tools and strong backs. They helped him rebuild the barn, a silent offering of community and respect. Months passed. The scorched earth where the barn had stood was now the foundation of a new, stronger structure. The ranch was slowly recovering. Lily's voice, once a lost treasure, now filled the house with questions and laughter. She followed Mai everywhere, helping in the garden, learning the names of the herbs, her silence replaced by an endless, joyful curiosity. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the prairie, Caleb found Mai by the creek. He held something in his hand. It was a ring carved from a piece of salvaged wood from the rebuilt barn, smoothed and polished until it shone. He took her hand. "The house needs a mistress," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "The child needs a mother. And he paused, his gaze meeting hers raw and vulnerable. "I need a wife. Not as part of a contract, not to fill an empty space, but as a partner, as the woman I love. Will you marry me?" She looked from the simple wooden ring to his face, seeing a man reborn. A man who had walked through fire and emerged not hardened, but whole. A single tear traced a path down her cheek as she gave him her answer, a quiet yes that was a promise of a future they would build together. A week later, the postwriter delivered a letter. It bore the seal of a missionary society on the coast. Caleb watched as Mai opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the page, then filled with tears not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. "They are alive," she whispered, looking up at him, her face radiant. "My family. They survived. The society found them. They are coming here." The final scene of their old life played out a few days later. Caleb took the silver locket and Sarah's letters and walked with Mai and Lily to a spot near the creek where the prairie roses grew. Together, they dug a small hole at the base of a newly planted cottonwood sapling. He placed the items inside, burying the last vestiges of the past. It was not an act of forgetting, but of forgiveness. He was laying his ghosts to rest, to cultivate a new future. As the sun warmed their faces, Caleb, Mai, and a happy talkative Lily worked side by side planting a small garden. The rich, dark earth crumbled in their hands, a symbol of their new growing life, a testament to a quiet, resilient love that had taken root in the hardest of soils.